The plane was descending perfectly, passengers already reaching for their bags. When Captain Mitchell looked out his window and saw the impossible, the runway was moving, shifting like a living thing, and he had less than 60 seconds to save everyone on board. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. And please like and subscribe for more videos like this. Captain James Mitchell had been flying commercial aircraft for 23 years. He had logged over 15,000 flight hours, navigated through storms that would terrify most pilots, and landed planes in conditions that pushed both man and machine to their limits. At 51 years old, with silver streaking through his dark hair and lines etched around his eyes from years of squinting into bright skies, he was the kind of pilot passengers felt safe with. His voice over the intercom was calm and reassuring, the voice of someone who had seen everything and feared nothing. Flight 447 from Chicago to Denver was supposed to be routine. A quick 2-hour hop, mostly empty seats, clear skies all the way. Mitchell sat in the cockpit with his co-pilot, a younger man named Derek who was competent, but still learning the subtle art of reading weather patterns and trusting instinct over instruments. They had been descending for the past 15 minutes, the Rocky Mountains rising majestically in the distance, Denver sprawling below them like a grid of lights and streets. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape, and everything seemed perfectly normal. Mitchell went through his pre-landing checklist, his hands moving with practiced ease over the controls. Flaps extended, landing gear down, speed steady, altitude dropping, 2,000 feet, 1,500, 1,000. The control tower had cleared them for landing on runway 27, and Mitchell could see it clearly now. A long strip of concrete stretching out before them, perfectly aligned with their approach. Derek was monitoring the instruments, calling out readings in that steady monotone pilots use when everything is going according to plan. 500 feet, 400, 300. Passengers in the cabin were putting away their phones, fastening their seat belts, straightening their seats. The flight attendants were strapped into their jump seats, ready for touchdown. Mitchell eased back slightly on the controls, adjusting for the gentle crosswind that always seemed to blow across the Colorado plains. 200 feet, 100, and then he saw it. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. The runway, that solid strip of concrete he had been aiming for, seemed to shift. Not much, just a slight movement to the left, like watching something through water. Mitchell blinked, leaned forward, stared harder. The runway moved again. This time, there was no mistaking it. The entire surface was rippling, undulating like waves on an ocean. The concrete buckling and heaving as if the earth itself was alive beneath it. His breath caught in his throat. This was impossible. Runways do not move. They are made of reinforced concrete, tons and tons of it, anchored deep into bedrock. But he was watching it happen, watching the surface twist and buckle, cracks spreading like spider webs across the pavement. Abort. Derek shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Pull up, pull up. But Mitchell was already moving, his training overriding his shock. He slammed the throttles forward, pouring power back into the engines. The plane shuddered, the sudden acceleration pressing everyone back into their seats. The nose began to lift, but they were so close now, less than 50 feet above ground, the wheels almost touching. Mitchell pulled harder on the controls, feeling the aircraft strain against gravity and momentum. The runway rushed past beneath them, and he caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. The concrete was not just cracking, it was opening up. Huge sections of pavement were collapsing inward, falling into darkness below, as if the ground had simply disappeared. And then they were climbing, the engine screaming, the plane shaking violently as it fought for altitude. 100 feet. 200. 300. Mitchell kept pulling, kept climbing, his knuckles white on the controls. Behind them, through the cockpit windows, he could see the runway continuing to disintegrate. Entire chunks of it falling away into massive sinkholes that had opened up without warning. The control tower was screaming in his headset, voices overlapping in confusion and alarm. Flight 447, what is your status? Do you need emergency assistance? Mitchell keyed his mic, forcing his voice to stay calm, even though his heart was hammering in his chest. Tower, we have aborted landing. The runway is collapsing. Repeat, the runway is collapsing. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end. Then chaos erupted. Mitchell banked the plane hard to the right, circling away from the airport, giving himself space to think. Below, he could see emergency vehicles racing toward the runway. See people running, see the extent of the damage spreading like a disease across the airport grounds. Derek was pale, his hands shaking as he stared at the instruments. What just happened? What the hell just happened? Mitchell did not answer. He was too busy calculating. They had burned fuel during the aborted landing, but they still had enough for maybe another 30 minutes of flight time. Problem was, Denver International was the only major airport within range, and its main runways were now unusable. The tower came back on, a different voice this time, someone senior, someone trying to regain control of the situation. Flight 447, we are evacuating the airport. We have 2 runways compromised. Runway 35 is still intact, but we are conducting visual inspections before we can clear you for landing. Stand by, Mitchell acknowledged and continued circling, his mind racing through options. He looked down at the fuel gauge, watched the numbers slowly ticking down. 30 minutes was not much time. If runway 35 turned out to be unsafe, they would have to divert to Colorado Springs, or maybe even Cheyenne, Wyoming. But that would be cutting it close, dangerously close. And he had a plane full of passengers who were probably terrified right now, who had felt that sudden acceleration, that violent climb, who knew something had gone very wrong. Minutes crawled by like hours. Mitchell kept the plane in a wide holding pattern, watching the airport below, watching the emergency crews swarm over the damaged runways. Derek was on the radio, coordinating with the tower, getting updates. The news was not good. The sinkholes were massive, caused by something the engineers were calling subsidence, a sudden collapse of underground cavities that no one had known existed. Apparently, decades ago, the area had been honeycombed with old mining tunnels, long abandoned and forgotten, and those tunnels had finally given way under the weight of the airport above. The timing was pure chance, pure terrible luck, that it had happened just as Flight 447 was about to land. Another few seconds and they would have been on the ground when the runway opened up beneath them. Mitchell did not let himself think about what would have happened then. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the tower came back with clearance. Flight 447, runway 35, has been inspected and cleared. You are cleared to land. Winds are calm. Emergency crews are standing by. Mitchell acknowledged, began his approach again, this time toward a different runway on the far side of the airport. His hands were steadier now, his breathing more controlled, but the adrenaline was still coursing through his system. He could feel every nerve ending alive, hyper-aware of every sound, every vibration, every tiny adjustment of the controls. This time, the landing was smooth. The wheels touched down on solid concrete that did not move, did not ripple, did not collapse. Mitchell felt the resistance as the brakes engaged, felt the plane slow, felt the weight settle as they rolled to a stop. Only then did he allow himself to exhale, a long, shaky breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. Derek was slumped in his seat, looking like he had aged 10 years in the past 30 minutes. Mitchell reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "We are down. We are safe. Everyone is safe." The passengers deplaned in stunned silence, many of them still not fully understanding what had happened, why they had suddenly climbed instead of landing, why emergency vehicles were everywhere. Mitchell stood at the cockpit door as they filed past, meeting their eyes, nodding reassurances. Some thanked him. Others just stared, processing. One woman stopped, tears streaming down her face, and said simply, "You saved us." Mitchell did not know how to respond to that. He had just done his job, done what any pilot would do when faced with the impossible. But as he watched the passengers walk away, watched them reunite with loved ones in the terminal, he felt something shift inside him. This had been too close. Far too close. The investigation that followed lasted months. Engineers descended on the airport, examining every inch of the remaining runways, mapping the underground tunnels, determining the extent of the damage. It turned out that the collapse had been inevitable, that the weight of decades of aircraft landings had slowly weakened the ground until it finally gave way. But no one had predicted it would happen so suddenly, so catastrophically. Mitchell was hailed as a hero, interviewed by news outlets, commended by his airline, but he deflected the praise, insisting he had simply reacted, simply followed his training. The real story, he said, was about infrastructure, about the hidden dangers lurking beneath surfaces we assume are solid, about the importance of constant vigilance and maintenance. Because on that day, luck had been on their side. A few seconds earlier, and Flight 447 would have been landing just as the runway collapsed. A few seconds later, and they might not have had enough altitude to pull up in time. Sometimes, Mitchell realized, the difference between disaster and survival is measured not in minutes or even seconds, but in heartbeats. In the split-second decision to trust what your eyes are telling you even when your brain says it is impossible. In the willingness to act without hesitation when every instinct is screaming that something is wrong. Derek eventually went back to flying, though it took him a while to feel comfortable in the cockpit again. Mitchell flew for another 3 years before finally retiring, hanging up his captain's wings and spending his days in the mountains he had flown over so many times. But he never forgot that afternoon, never forgot the sight of a runway moving beneath him like something alive. And whenever someone asked him about it, about what it felt like to face something so unexpected, so impossible, he would pause and think carefully before answering. "Fear is natural," he would say. "Panic is deadly." The difference between the two is training, experience, and the absolute refusal to give up even when the ground itself is falling away beneath you. Flight 447 became a case study in aviation schools, a reminder that the unexpected can happen at any moment, that complacency is the enemy of safety, that the most dangerous assumption a pilot can make is that everything will go according to plan. Because sometimes the runway moves. Sometimes The solid ground you have trusted your entire career turns out to be fragile. And in those moments, the only thing standing between disaster and survival is the skill, the courage, and the sheer determination of the person holding the controls. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe for more videos like this.